The World Tomorrow. The Worldwide Church of God presents Herbert W. Armstrong.
And I'm here to bring you the truth. No one else is telling you the things that God is telling you through me. He's speaking through me.
The Lord let me experience what it is to be a new bride. You know, I'm not worried about what I'm about to say, though it may be graphic. We're coming to the Lord, and if you can take it, beyond the veil is the chamber. That's the wedding chamber. The Lord told me that.
But from then on, visions begin to come. When this comes up on me, it produces a vision. I'm able to tell people what's wrong with them, what they must do in life, and the sins that they are holding back in their life.
God is going to be moving mightily and fast like He never has before, both hastening in judgment and hastening in the fulfillment of His eternal plan for the sons of God.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Cult Next Door podcast. Before we get started with today's episode, another reminder to follow us on our socials, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok, and also a reminder to go leave us a review, especially on Apple, but wherever you listen, go leave us a review, tell us what you think. We also have that other way that you can connect with us, which is to leave a voice message with a question or a comment, and we might feature it on the show. So we've got one today from Emily Wingard, who is actually Luna's sister, who we had on the podcast just earlier this month. Let's take a listen.
Hi, my name's Emily. I am actually Luna's youngest sister, and I was so excited this morning when she let me know that the episode with her on was out. So I listened to that, and it was just really, really good to hear it, just to hear her perspective in a public setting. It was pretty neat. I had always wanted to tell you guys that since I first heard your episode, or your podcast, sorry, especially the first couple of episodes, there was a moment where I thought, is it possible that my dad had a second family? Our stories were so similar. They, who they were was just, intensely familiar. And I thought, could it be that he pulled that off? Obviously not. But anyway, thank you so much for your podcast. It has been so healing for me, and I know so many people. Just even getting to the point of being able to look at this stuff and call it what it is. And just, I'm still working through the programming and everything. I've come a long way, right? But still so far to go. So just thank you. Thank you for what you're doing and what you share. And who you are.
Well, Emily, thank you so much for leaving that message. It's funny because we've had that same kind of conversation with, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 people now where they've said they literally were listening and wondered, like, is it possible that this is the same person? Which just kind of goes to show you there's a pathology there. There's a study to be done about this type of person. And I just think that's really interesting. Listeners, if you would like to leave a voice message to potentially have it featured on the show, you can find the link on our Instagram bio or at the top of the episode description for the episode that you're listening to right now. It's a service called SpeakPipe, so you can follow that link, click record, and you can send us a voice message. Also, as always, got to do our double portion club shout-outs. Shanda and Chase, big ups to you guys. Heather Bartlett, Carla, and Julia B., thank you all very much for supporting the podcast. Also, if you, listener, would like to be in that club, it's $10 a month to get ad-free episodes and this shout-out. Or you can go for the $5 a month to support the work, and you'll get ad-free episodes, and we'll send you a really cool holographic Cult Next Door sticker. So today's episode is part 1 with Mel and Liz. These are 2 sisters that, again, they heard our podcast and it resonated with them. So many of the things that we talked about and that guests have been on that have talked about, it resonated with them. So they reached out maybe a few months ago, and then we said, hey, why don't we chat and see if this would be a good fit for the podcast? And it was absolutely, and I really, really enjoyed talking to them. Unfortunately, we had some technical difficulties, so Ashley could not be part of this recording. It's a real bummer, but I know she's going to enjoy listening to these. But I really enjoyed talking to these 2, and I think all of you will really enjoy listening. So let's go for it. Liz, Melanie, thank you both for joining us today. Melanie, you reached out to us via email, I think, or maybe it was on one of our socials when we kind of put out a call for people to maybe come on the podcast, and you kind of told a little bit about your story. And Liz, this is the first time I'm meeting you, but both of you kind of have an intertwined story, obviously being sisters. So I just want to kind of jump into it. Melanie, if you want to kind of start off, like, just the origin of your cult story, if you just want to kind of jump into it.
Okay. Yeah. Um, so I'm going to start before the cult because most parts of stories start before you actually get into the crazy. But my parents were hippies, good hippies, and the outcast of their families in a lot of ways. They were the rebels, and they got married when my mom was very young, and my dad had been divorced and had a child, and um, so they started off their life together a little crazy at first because, like I said, their parents weren't very happy with them and such. And my mom left college to go get married, and so 3 years later, they got pregnant with me, and they, ended up and I feel like it was when mom was pregnant with me. Yeah, it was. They ended up running into an old friend who was a preacher, and my dad just, like, on the spot got saved. It was very kind of this crazy situation. He was trying to sell Amway to the preacher, and the preacher said, "Okay, I'll listen to your story, I'll listen to your pitch if you'll listen to mine." And so, he walked out of the preacher's office being saved and not selling any Amway, I don't think. So that would have been in '79, and they were like my mom got saved, like, a month later, they were all in. My dad was already, like, the worship minister very quickly because he played in bands and stuff. He's a, musician. So he very quickly got very invested. Um, and then by the time that Liz came along, which is a couple years later, then he got ordained and he was gonna, be a preacher. And that was our life. And so we were in a very I feel like it was like Assembly of God type church at that time. And then, we ended up he never found, like, a place of a church that could actually support him, so he always ended up working on the side. And then he got out of ministry somewhat. We moved around a lot the first few years of our lives. So, I would say by the time that I was 5, about 5 and a half. That's when we moved to South Carolina, and because we were in Georgia, North Carolina, South Carolina all during that time. And then we moved to South Carolina to kind of outside of Charleston, and, he went to a church there, and I don't even know if he had, like, a title of, like, associate pastor or if he was just gonna, help with the preaching. I feel like maybe that was his title, but he was gonna help with the preaching, and he also, led praise and worship. And that's when our younger brother was born, was around that time. Um, so at this point, my mom's very busy with having, you know, little kids, and, um, my dad is very involved in church. That our whole life revolved around wherever dad was gonna be ministering in some way. And so at this church, we were there for a little while, and then I don't know exactly when it happened because I know it was between time I was 5 and 7, so but they got invited to, come and listen to this traveling minister, and this traveling minister was part of The Move. That's what it was called, The Move or The Move of God, and this was a group that had been going on since the '60s. It they had at different times, they had, like, a big following. During the '80s and '90s, I think was probably its biggest boom. So this is now, um, mid-'80s, and this traveling minister came and was speaking to most of the people from that church. It was a very small church, and most of the people from that church, and they got involved, and decided to go test out things and go to one of their conventions. So the conventions were these times where people from all different places across the country who were listening to these traveling ministers or preaching these type of things would come together and um, have a conference for a few days. It usually started on Wednesday night and went until Sunday afternoon, and it was in South Georgia. So we went. I know that we went the first time. I feel like it was 86, somewhere
I think
around
it
there.
was 87.
87? Okay.
I think it was
So it was
87.
yeah. So we went for the first time, and it's at a convention center. Like, I think we took somebody's RV. Like, it was somebody from our church had an RV, and so our family went down there in the RV and stayed on the campground, and then we would go to these big meetings that were they were lasted so long. I mean, the preaching was so long. So it would start like at 9 o'clock in the morning, and then it'd go until like 1 or 2 in the afternoon. And they would have 2 a day. So you'd have that in the morning, and then you have like a little break, and then you come back for it again at like 6 p.m. or something and go until 10. And um
Very familiar.
yeah, exactly. Um I remember as a kid, we were just, like, bored out of our mind, and we would always have to sit there through the whole thing, and, um, we'd, like, make little pallets around on the floor around my mom and dad's, like, chairs to sleep and stuff. Um, but anyway, so that's how we got into it, and then by the time that I was at, 7, 8. We were, like, full into this type of teaching. We were having the traveling ministry because there's a group of a whole bunch of them. They would come through and preach at our church probably, like, at least every couple of months, someone would come through, and usually when they come through, they come and stay at our house a lot of times. And so then we'd go to all the services when they were there because it almost would be like a little revival type thing. Like, they'd have, multiple meetings, while they were there, but also they'd stay at our house, so then they'd, talk to us and everything, get to know us while they were in town. And then during the week, I mean, during the, rest of the month, it would be our who would kind of be considered our head pastor at that time, and then my dad would do most of the preaching, during the rest of the time when the traveling ministry wasn't coming through. And we would go to these conventions 3 times a year. So we were there in April, in July, and in October. So there were very influential parts of our life. Like, we never went on vacations. We went to convention.
Mm.
That was that was how it worked for our family. And as time progressed, it got more and more intense, as far as, like, how it affected our life, um, which we will definitely get into what it looked like when we were teenagers, where we actually lived in a commune, because that was part of it. Um, but I was also gonna let Liz just kinda give a little background of what the move was and kinda what it looked like in general too.
It started in the 60s, like Mel said, by a man named Sam Fife, and he was a Baptist preacher, I think, and he just decided that this this was the end times and that God's chosen people needed to be set apart and, live under a kind of a hierarchy of authority. So the way that the authority was set up within the move was you had father ministry, traveling ministry, and then elders. And the elders were who kind of were like on the ground leaders for all the little groups. And then the traveling ministry, like Mel was talking about, traveled around to keep everybody, to teach everybody the word. And the father ministry traveled sometimes, but they were also kind of like the top. Like if you had an issue, that's just who you went to. They were the top of the authority. So part of the theology, I guess, of the move was to be set apart. So it was to live in these communes and be not associated with the world. So a lot of these, what we call farms, were in remote places like Alaska or Canada, or just as remote as you could get, because you were really supposed to not be involved in the world. This wasn't an evangelical group. Like we did not go out and try to win people to Christ at all. It was you stay to yourself because the world is evil. And so it was global. There were farms everywhere, but the large concentration of the farms were in the Alaska, Canada area. But then there were also there were farms in Texas and California, all over the lower 48 as well. And then there were also some groups in the UK, South America, Mexico. There were groups everywhere. And these conventions would happen. They had conventions all these different places. So they had the Georgia conventions that we went to, and they had Texas conventions, they had Alaska conventions. So they had conventions like all over. And then whoever was in the vicinity would just go to that. That was like your kind of local convention that you had to go to.
I think some of the main teachings were that because you were being set apart, you were being set above others, including any other church tradition. So they often talked pretty badly about any other denomination. We were the chosen ones, and we were the ones that were going to, their main thing is that we were going to make it to perfection. And that in perfection, we were not going to die. We were going to just move into the next world and rule as people who were in perfection of Christ. So it was a lot of like, from the beginning, here we're kids, so we don't know anything different. And we automatically are hearing that, we're at this higher level than other people. We're the special ones. They were very into death to self. So anything that you would like or enjoy or you would think of for you was part of the carnal man. And that automatically put you at odds with what God has for you and with what God, for you being in that place of eventually coming to perfection. They did not believe that salvation was just like you get saved and you will go to heaven someday. It was very much you work for your salvation and you better be ready when he comes back. All of our songs, most of our songs that we sang were ones that were written by people in the move. And so they were all like scriptures that were commonly used or talked about things that, were preached on and stuff like that. So even in our praise and worship, it was very, very just getting their point across of like, this is what we believe. We're the higher ones, There was one song that literally it said, "We're not going to die." That was like the main theme of the song. So we're not going to die.
So was the not dying part, was that because it was the end time and like Jesus was going to come back any minute? Or was it like, even if it's 50 more years, like everyone's just going to keep living? Or was it more about like what's about to happen?
No, it definitely was. It was that it was the end times, that it was all going to end. I mean, end as in the world as we know it was going to end. By the time that we got into the 90s, they were preaching that 2000, or actually it was 1996, and they had a whole thing about why it was 1996 and not 2000. It's like this ridiculousness. But anyway, and that it was all gonna, we were gonna walk with Christ and then. And of course that did not happen, but yeah, I mean, it was even at that point, I was a teenager and they were like, they didn't want people to get married or like anything like that because you're not going to need that in the new heaven and new earth.
Okay. And you've
Yeah.
already covered a little bit of this, obviously, in some spots and kind of what sounds like a little bit more extreme doctrine and teaching. But I wanted to go back real quick. So when your dad kind of had his radical, when he was saved and all
Yeah.
of that with the Amway and all, so
Yes.
when the move came along, what were the major, and like I said, you've already said some of them that are obviously different from nominal Christianity, but what were the major things that drew your dad to it? Like, how different was it from what he knew beforehand? Like, I always find that interesting, even
Yeah.
like with my dad, like what stuck out to these men that were like, yes, this thing, this is it. Like, what was it?
Liz, do you want to take that one?
Well, I mean, I think very little of it was really the theology. I think that he saw a need and he saw a place where he could be appreciated because at the conventions, very quickly, like with maybe after the very first convention that we went to, um, he became the sound he and a friend of his became the sound people at the convention. Like, they would run the sound for the entire convention in Georgia every single time, and I feel like that was something where he felt like he could fill a need and he felt
Mm-hmm.
appreciated, which is a big deal to my dad. Um, so I think that's part of it. I think that was a part of why it took over our lives so quickly, was that there was just that constant need. But then I do think he bought into it. Um, I don't know if there's a
At least to
particular
some
reason
degree.
why, but yeah, I think he bought into it to some degree. I don't know if there was something that he was like, "Oh, yes, this is what I've been looking for."
Mm-hmm.
I think, he was fairly new Christian, and he was looking for a group of people that he could be a part of and that he could feel like he's growing. And I'm sure he thought about his family and that it was a good environment for his family. I don't know. I don't know that he was really attracted to the theology of it.
Okay.
That was never necessarily
Although
talked
I
about.
do think that he really likes intellectual, higher learning type stuff. And that, like, the way that the preaching was done is you honestly felt like you had to have some kind of crazy degree in the move to, like, understand what they were talking about. It was, like, such ridiculousness now that you go back and listen to it, because we just happened to go back and listen to a little. Um, but the way it was taught was extremely, like, higher intelligent type, if that makes any sense. Um, it didn't seem like it was for just the lowly masses. Um So I don't know if that had something to do with it. I know my mom loves community and feeling like she's a part of a,
Mm-hmm.
group of people, and so I think it met a need for her as well in that way. Um, but yeah, we look back and we're like, "Why? It doesn't make any sense."
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think it's fascinating, maybe for lack of a better term, to kind of look at some of these groups and all the different kinds of people that are drawn to it for very different reasons.
Right.
Like for your family, maybe like you said, Liz, it's not really the theology, it's not this, no doubt there are people that were in that group that were drawn to it because of the whole, like, we're special, we have the special knowledge, we're the special people thing. Like, I knew people in our background that were very much drawn to that, and then others that it was more about like the community and the theology and the teaching that was way secondary, and that was just accepted because that was a term of being in the community of the church. Like, you're kind of like, yeah, okay, sure, like, you believe it, but that's not why you join. So I think
Right.
that's really interesting to kind of get into that, like, what draws people. It's never just one thing.
Right. And we have asked them, you know, later in life, like, explain where we are coming from with the fact that we grew up in it, so we didn't have any reference of anything else. And, like, "Why would you let us believe this?" Um, and they're just like, "We didn't realize." Like, I think the way that my dad looks at it is, I was going into this as an adult who understood other things, who could, actually put it in reference to other things. So he could say, I listened to a sermon and I thought, oh, well, I'll take what I like out of that or what I agree with, and then I'll just throw away the rest. Whereas when you grow up in it and that's all you know and that's all you hear, then you assume that all of it is right. All of it is, what you're supposed to believe. And I don't think
Hmm.
that they realized all the junk that we were getting out of it, because for them, they're just like, "Well, that's just dumb. I just don't believe that."
Yeah.
So, yeah. But during that time, so when we were young and still in Waltboro, we were homeschooled. So that was a thing that my parents were gonna do either way, because my mom had already decided she wanted to homeschool us back in Georgia. So we were homeschooled, so that was not necessarily a move thing, but that was just our family thing. And we didn't back in the 80s, homeschooling was definitely not like it is now, so there weren't many people around.
Yeah.
It was very hard to find other homeschoolers. Um, and also there were no other kids in our church. It was literally just us for
Oh,
kids in our
wow.
church.
Okay.
So we were very much like our only friends. It was just our siblings. And we did occasionally have other people in our lives that had other children, but it was not very common for us to be around other children at all. Um, and then except when we went to convention, and then we could be around other kids, and sometimes that was a good thing, sometimes not. We still didn't have a lot of friends at this point. I mean, Liz and I grew up very much, it was just the two of us as friends. That, like, she was my only friend. Um, but then we were able to, because our group in Walterboro was considered a city body. That's what they called them. So they had farms and then they had city bodies. So the city body, and when I say body, just like the body of Christ, um, the city bodies would have, it was a little different. It was a little looser. Like, yes, you still listen to the same messages. Yes, you still had, because Sam Fife had died in the 70s, but he had all these, like, tapes. They had all these tapes of his messages, and they had these pamphlets that he had written and all this stuff. So everybody, all the adults, would be listening to those and making sure that, they understood and, stayed right with God with all this theology. And, um, but the city body was not held to as tight of rules, I would say, as, like, the farm was. So, we were allowed to still, like, um we went to dance class. So, Liz and I were both in dance, and we could do that. And, we were in 4-H.
We could wear shorts or pants when we weren't at church.
Yes,
Okay.
exactly. That was very exciting. We could even wear bathing suits and go swimming
Yeah.
and did not have to
Well,
be, like,
that's
totally covered.
kind of scandalous.
I know. I mean, they were
That's kind
onesies,
of
but,
out there.
Oh, goodness. But we could interact with other people that were not part of our group. Now, we had to be careful with that. There was always the warning of, you don't want the world to rub off on you.
Hmm.
But it wasn't like it was in the farms, which we got to find out what that was like later on. But during I would say, most formative years, we were still living a at least somewhat normal childhood. We could still play with kids in our neighborhood and, um, things like that.
But there was definitely the increasing throughout from the time, like, that we started going to convention and really getting into the move until we did move to the farm in 1993. there was still a lot of increasing, what do I want to say? Like brainwashing and control. There was a lot
Yeah.
of control tactics that still ended up being used, like with my parents on us. Like there was still a lot that it was ramping up before we ever went to the farm. And I think that we were kind of the only young family in that city group, and we were targeted by certain traveling ministry to try to get us to move to a farm. Because to really be a part of the move, you really need to be on a farm, because that's where you could really be set apart. And I feel like my parents were really targeted by certain particular traveling ministers when they would come through, and trying to convince them that we needed to go to a farm, which I'm sure is what led to us eventually moving to a farm, even though it wasn't the one that any of these traveling ministers were at. Um, but yeah, it definitely, like, it wasn't a normal childhood even then, even though it wasn't it wasn't crazy, like, it wasn't totally a farm, but it wasn't normal either, I would say.
So the farm part, was that something that the original leader, you said it was Fife was his name, right? Was that
Yes.
something that he prescribed, or was that post him, or was he all about that when he was alive?
No, he was all about that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, gotcha.
So they had started some of the farms even back in the 60s, and some of them, it was just horrific kind of things that went on there. You would hear horror stories about it even when we were in, but it was like, "Oh, but it's, things are much better now." And those, some of the places, literally, they closed down the whole farm because it was so terrible what
Mm.
happened. So I don't even know all the stories. I know there was some pretty severe stuff that went on, but, yeah, by the 80s and 90s, it was like, if you were gonna be serious about, perfection and moving on with God in the way that you were supposed to, and not being left behind in, this sinful, carnal world, like the Baptist and the Assemblies of God and all the other places, then you were gonna have to move to a farm, because iron sharpens iron, and that's the only way for that to really happen, is when you're right there with other people. Going back to what Liz said about it not being normal, I like to think it was a normal childhood compared to the farm, but yeah, you're right, it wasn't normal. Because, one of the things that, they were really adamant on was that there was a demonic presence in the world, and that it was pretty much always out there ready to get you. And so if you, let any sinful nature come in, demons could just take over. So back in the 60s, I think, maybe 70s, they had literal exorcisms, with people. And there was one particular one that was like very well known, and they audio recorded it. So they were called the Jane tapes. And so people would listen to the Jane tapes to
wow.
listen to this exorcism. It's really horrific and weird. I don't know. But
Wow.
when I was a child, I was still about 7 or 8, and I was, a rebellious child. That's what, I was known as being very rebellious. I think I was just a normal 7-year-old, but that talked back some. But anyway, they decided, the church, 'cause I don't even think my parents necessarily particularly thought this, but the church decided, like, the elders in the church decided that I had some demonic, um, spirit, like, issue. Like, they, um, because I was a rebellious 7-year-old, and so they had me listen to the Jane tapes. Now, my parents obviously okayed it because I did it at my house. But I don't think it was them who decided that I should, but I think that they went along with it. So at like 7 or 8 years old, I'm listening to an audio recording of an exorcism, because, I mean, being told that it was because I likely had evil spirits that were affecting my life. So
And what were you maybe you didn't and don't know still. What were you supposed to do after you listen to these like you're supposed to be like, yeah, you're right, I don't want that. Like I'm just like
Exactly.
the
I mean, I
thinking of
think
the
it was
adults in
supposed
the
to
room, like,
right. I think it's supposed to just, like, scare me out of doing bad things? I don't know. It's very confusing because I have a 7-year-old that is my youngest that I look at right now, and I think, first of all, I would never subject her to something like that, even if like, I wouldn't even
no.
let her watch, a movie that was a fake exorcism, but certainly not tell her that she needs to listen to this because she's being too rebellious, because she talks back to adults, and I don't know. I'll be honest, I don't know what their plan was with that.
I'm sure it was a fear tactic, I'm
I
sure. I mean,
think it
that's
probably
just what
was
Yeah.
they
too.
used, and they were trying to scare you into better behavior. But, I mean, I believe that they felt like any misbehavior was demonic. So, like, what they considered to be misbehavior or doing anything against what they thought was right, it was considered demonic. And that was pretty widely known that, like, okay, you've let a demon take over your life because you're not making the choices to live towards sinless perfection because you're making these choices instead or something.
Man.
Even as a strong-willed child.
Yeah.
Right. Which
Yeah,
Liz
they
was
had to
very
break that
fortunate.
will.
That's right, yeah. Liz was very fortunate when she was young that she was very much a people pleaser and very good at reading the room and knowing, "Oh, I don't wanna do that." I think she learned a lot by
Yeah.
watching what happened with me.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
So
Hmm.
when do you've already pointed out some of this through this progression, and we've talked about this before on this podcast, like weird doctrine does not cult make or high control group. Like you can say like that's super weird, whatever. That doesn't
Right.
make it a high control. But obviously you've already illustrated some of the things where it's like, okay, you're manipulating people, you're controlling people. Do you think there was a point as far as you guys know in your kind of journey through this where this group kind of jumped the shark, or was it just they were always a cult or a high control group? You were just being introduced to the more high control aspects, or was there something that through the progression of it where it's like, okay, now we've gone to another level where they're controlling things to a new degree?
Oh, they were a high control group before we ever got involved,
Yeah.
absolutely. It was I don't know at what point in the progression with Sam Fife that potentially happened, although I feel like he set it up with the hierarchy to be a high control group because
Mhm.
only only the father ministry really knew what God wanted. And, so there already was this, like, it was already set up to be a high control group,
Mhm.
but I don't know, if it progressed throughout the '70s and then when he died and then everyone else took over, we came in after that. So we were never there when Sam Fife was alive and running things. So I don't know if there was a transition during that time where it became more high control, but it absolutely was already a very high control group when we got involved.
Yeah.
But our family progressed into getting deeper and deeper into the control of the group. So, like, we started kind of on the periphery, but then we just got deeper and deeper into it. And then when we moved to the farm, that's where it was like, okay, now you've completely surrendered yourself to this group.
Okay.
So that's sort of, I think that's how it went for us.
Yeah.
Yeah, and some of the things that they did that were in the line of the control, aspect is you were not allowed to hear from God for yourself, for your family, whatever, without it going through a line of all these people that had to agree with whatever you were doing. So, as an example, when we decided, I say we, when my parents decided to move to the farm, even though that was the thing that everyone had told us that we needed to do, that was the next step. That was That was the like destination of where we should be going. We had to ask for words of wisdom, which meant that they had to call on these people who were like considered the prophets and prophetess that would hear from God for you. And they would pray and they would have visions or they would have dreams or whatever, because they were known as the people who could do that. And they might not be people that you know. Like they would send it, maybe somebody would be in Texas and maybe somebody would be in Ohio and someone in Georgia. And they would just have your name and they'd pray over you. And then they would send you those words of wisdom or whatever, whether it was a vision or a dream or whatever, and they'd send that and they'd send it to the elders of your local group. Ultimately, you have to get words of wisdom, which means that you have to send off for these people who can get dreams and visions. They have select people who are the people who are kind of prophets, prophetess, whatever. I don't know what they called them, to be completely honest, but they would be the ones who would get the dreams and visions for people. And then they would pray over your name. And then whatever dream or vision they got, they would then send that to your eldership at the group that you were at. And then those elders would then interpret those dreams and visions and decide what that meant for you if you were, and this was used for things like if you were going to move, if you were going to make any kind of bigger-ish decision in your life. Definitely if you were going to get married, or even, well, they didn't allow dating, but you could have a courtship type thing that they called walking out a year. And if you were going to do that, you would have to have these dreams and visions. And so when the eldership got back, of course, they were supposed to not be biased in any way and decide according to how they felt about you, which definitely played into that. But then they would decide what God was saying of what you could do. So
You mean that God's word wasn't impartial?
right.
Amazing. It sounded
And
a lot like what they wanted.
right. So it definitely got used in times where like two people were interested in courting or dating, or well, not dating, courting or getting married, and they would just decide, well, we don't like them. So we're gonna decide that these visions and dreams don't mean that, that they can be together.
Okay.
And it also meant that type of thing for if one time when I was a teenager, I wanted to move to one of the farms in Canada. And so I asked for dreams and visions for that. And it came back. I mean, the thing is, it would be something like I saw a hill and I saw a girl walking up the hill and her hat was blown off of her head. That was like what the vision was. And so then they would decide if this meant that I was supposed to go to Canada or not. And anyway, whatever. It's just
So
it was another one of those very controlling situations.
so with these visions and prophecies and things, so
Yes.
did lay people, so to speak, have the
Yes.
gifts and like visions and things, but you're saying there were a select group that it almost sounds like it was the oracle that you had to go to. Is
Yes.
that what you're kind
So
of
yes,
saying?
so there were like certain people who were they were lay people, but they were decided upon that they were ones that, and I don't even know how they came about to be that. Like this might be something that my parents would know and I just don't, but I don't know how they became the people, but I did know a couple of the people. Like I knew of them. And I knew them as people, and I knew that, like, this one lady I knew, she would talk about every morning she'd get up at, like, 6 a.m. and she'd go to her little prayer corner and sit down in her chair in the quiet, and she'd pick up the names of those people that had been sent to her that week, and then when she would get the word for them, then she'd write it down and then send it off to wherever it was supposed to go. But the thing is, even though even even if they had this amazing gift, which I'm, not going to go into that right now, but even if they did, it still was up to the eldership that was in your particular place who knew you, who decided what it meant. So that's where it got really sticky sometimes about these people who have their own agenda of what they want to see of you. And they can say it's, well, this is God's word for you. But, anyway.
And I don't want to derail, but I think I've asked other people this question, even people that were in the group that we were in.
Yeah.
Did either of you ever have like visions or prophecies or anything like that yourselves?
So one time as a teenager, I had what I would call a vision. Granted, I'm not going to say that I completely, but I was so sold out for this. I was so bought in. So I do believe that it also could just be my brain making it up. I mean, I was a teenager. Um, but I was definitely not one of the ones who would, have like visions or dreams or prophecies. But I did another time. Sorry, I forgot. When I was like 8 or 9, I had this dream, this very, very vivid dream. And it was about the son of our like head pastor in our group. And my parents decided that it was important that I tell the pastor and his wife about it and like explain it in detail because it could have meaning.
Mm.
So I remember telling them, and it was not a nice dream at all. I mean, it made their son, who was probably like 18 at the time, look really, really bad. And I remember feeling like this horrible guilt as a like 8-year-old thinking, I mean, I could tell that they were not happy with me. Like they were
Yeah.
angered at a child, But it was like that was the thing to do. If you had a dream or a vision, you had to share it because it could mean something.
I think another part of what we were talking about is what made it a cult versus or a high control
Yes.
group,
Mhm.
versus.
Yes.
Yes.
So I feel like if you just kind of check the boxes, it definitely was like isolation, you're supposed to be like set apart. And I think one of the reasons why they really wanted you off on the farms was number one for isolation, but also for financial control because you had to sell it, you had to sell it basically everything. You had to give, I don't know if it was half or 3/4 of your money to the farm. Like it wasn't just like 10% tithe. You were like giving everything. And most of these farms were more or less self-sustaining, but then there might be some people who needed some of the men, definitely not women, might need to go work off of the farm. But if you did that, you had to give half of that income to the farm. So it was sort of like if you went off to have a job, that was just part of contributing to the farm. So some people had jobs on the farm and some people had them off, but it was all part of the same thing. You had no, you couldn't progress for yourself. And then there was also like absolute authoritarianism in the sense that it was like whatever the leader said, whatever, if the elders of your group were the leaders that were to answer questions, then that was the absolute truth. And if it got taken up to the traveling ministry, then that was the absolute truth. And if it got taken up to the father ministry, I mean, obviously that's, so there's like definite isolation, authoritarianism, financial control, and even from like a something that we really experience as a family, or I felt like we did, is they don't let's respect like a family unit so much. It's like all the children are everyone's children. There isn't really like a family. And so everyone can discipline and raise and whatever, everyone's children, everyone's God's children. So so that was something that we really experienced, I feel like, when we moved to the farm, was that there's really not a family unit anymore. You're just all part of the group now. Everyone's just part of the group. Um, so those are some of the things, and then obviously they don't want you to leave, even though you're not actively recruiting people to come in. Once you're in, you are not to leave, and if you choose to leave, then it's, like when our family left, then it was like a black stain on, we were not respected or
Well, we were walking away
like
from God ultimately is how
right.
we
I mean,
were
obviously, we were
how it
making
was
the choice
considered.
to go to hell. That was obvious.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which definitely is a hallmark of high control. Like if you can't leave, not really, like you could leave, I could leave, but like, can you though? Like
Right.
when you have that thought where it's like, I actually can't, because everything gets blown to bits. Like, well, that should give a little insight. And maybe for people who are listening, if you are in a group or a relationship, that if you can't make that kind of decision without the thought like this is going to be nuclear, then you maybe ought to take a closer look. That's kind of a box that we're looking to check when we're looking at high control. So anyway, as an aside, but I did have a question, which I think I kind of know the answer to, but would you say that this group was always male centric? Was it patriarchal in hierarchy? I'm guessing.
Well, interestingly enough, I think Liz and I have different views on that. So I'm gonna let her tell her.
Well, I would say it was, but not in the sense that like women couldn't do anything, because there were
Yeah.
women elders and ministers, and most of the people who sought visions and dreams were women. But specifically young women um were villainized. There I would say like the group that was under the most high control of anyone in the entire cult is young women.
Mm.
And it was from, what you wear and how you wear your hair and how you are not to seduce men and how you are not to be around men. And like everything was put on young women as basically like you are basically the devil, but we're going to try to tell you how you can be better.
Hmm.
But every time you turn around, you're basically gonna be the devil. I mean, it's like
Yeah.
it just that's how it felt, at least. And both of
Yeah.
us went through being young women in it, and that was when we experienced the majority of what we would consider, abusive situations was when we were young women, because that's just really because the young men did not experience that. The young men, of course, were held to the sinless perfection, all those things. Like they're supposed to do all the things that everyone else, but they're not villainized. Um, and it's just, I guess, like I don't know if that really is patriarchal or not, but it's definitely like it wasn't the same for men and women,
Yeah.
especially young
Yeah.
men and women, in my opinion. That was my experience, but Mel can tell hers.
Well, and that part about the young women and how we were villainized, absolutely, I completely agree with. It's a big part of both of our stories. But the part that is a little different for me, and it's only because of what I was in after the move. I was in other religious situations where it was very much the women had no say. They had no right to even say anything. And so that versus what I grew up in, I feel like is a little different because in the move, I saw my mom as an elder. She was the head of our little, um, we actually made like a little Christian school at one point while we were at the farm, and my mom was like the head of that and ran that. And so I feel like there were definitely places where women still had a right to speak and speak up and have a leadership role, that in other places I didn't see that. But I
Hmm.
agree completely with the part of the young women were treated horribly. I mean, yeah, they were always the Jezebel in pretty much every situation.
Yeah.
And would you agree, Mel, that even like when it in a marriage situation, I mean, it was very much preached that the woman was submissive to her husband. The husband was the head of the household. The husband was the leader, and she was to be submissive to him.
Yeah, I guess so. And I think probably even in the eldership situations where a woman was an elder, it was always with her husband.
Hmm.
Or if she was like with a couple of the ladies at the farm, they were elders, but it was because they were like, their husband had died or something like that, but and they were just older, respected women in the community. But yeah, you're right. it probably was more that way than I realized or noticed.
And it sounds kind of like the, classic, which I experienced less as you were saying, like as a young man. But that kind of weaponized purity culture type thing seemed to be more focused on the young women. Like the men
Yes.
did have responsibility, but like really it was overall their fault for being the
Right.
temptress type thing. It sounds like that's
Right.
obviously not just our experience for the three of us, but like that's the common thing. So it sounds like that's what your group was chugging right along to. So
Yes. Yeah, and one of the going back to the whole thing, like, everybody got to raise the kids, like, it wasn't just the parents' responsibility. There are some weird things in that too, it was like everyone had a voice on how you parented, and I definitely think that that affected my parents a lot even before the farm. I think they were raising very young children, and my mom has said multiple times that she never felt like she was really prepared to be a mom or a very good mom, and I think a lot of the reason she feels that way is because when she was a young mom, she had all these people telling her that she was doing it wrong, that they knew better, and taking over for her in a lot of ways,
mhm.
leaving her to feel like she couldn't make decisions for her children, um, because she wasn't gonna make the right decision. And and they did some weird stuff, like, they let us hang out with this 30-something-year-old guy by ourselves, like, even go over to his house for overnight visits. It doesn't make any
Oof.
sense whatsoever, um, but he was one of our you gotta understand, like, this group and I know that you came from a small group, a small church too, but this was, like, I think at our height, we had, like, maybe 15 people. I mean, occasionally we'd have, like, a bigger group that came together, and so it would be more like 30 to 40. But, like, on a regular basis, it was like, somewhere closer to 12 to 15, and our family was a large portion of that. We had 5 kids, so our family was a large portion of that, and, um, and I think it was just assumed that whoever those people were in that tight little group were safe for anything, which was not
Mm,
accurate.
And that's back when we were in the city group, back in
Right.
Walterboro. We weren't part of the, the farm yet, but there was a prevalence within the move. Lots of people experienced, especially young girls or women, would experience abuse of some sort, and it wasn't handled well. Either they were just told it was their fault, or
mm,
they were, the person was never dealt with. And that's basically, that happened to us with this person that Mel's talking about when we were kids, and we had the strength to go to our parents and tell them what happened, and they came at it with the, "Well, we need to forgive and accept everybody and love people where they are." And they extended that to this guy who had abused their children, but didn't have that same for their kids. They weren't loving us where we were. They were saying, "Okay, get over it. It'll be alright. You're okay
mm.
now." But
Which was very prevalent with the teaching.
yeah, it was very on par, and it happened to a lot of people. But it happened to us even in a city group, not even at the farm, and
Right.
that's just the type of mentality that they had. And I still can't explain it. I don't know why they would think that's okay, but it happened to a lot of girls.
Yes, it did, and if it was bad enough, if it was considered like a really high offense, then they would be sent to these places that there was this one that was in Georgia called The Ridge. It was a place where they were supposed to really get intense counseling, and they would work them really hard and have like a really tight schedule. It was almost like I don't know, like a rehab or like their own little version of jail.
It's like a group
Yeah.
home for troubled teens. That's
There you
basically
go.
what it was. It
But I mean, it
was
was
yeah.
be for adults too that were like had issues.
Yeah.
So
Mm-hmm.
they would, if it was like really bad, they would be sent there, but never was the law involved. And we're talking about things that the law needed to be involved. Definitely. But it was like always kept within, had to be kept in the church and in that group.
What was considered, just as an example, as a bad offense? Like, what took it to the next level where they would kind of be sent away?
So I know someone personally who was sent to the Ridge, and he had physically pursued a relationship with someone who was a minor. He was in his early 20s, and they had, gone too far. And so because she was so young, now granted, she was made out to be a whore, but
Of
he did
course.
get sent to the Ridge for that, and he was there for like 3 months. Now I have no idea what he got from that, what, happened there that made him a rehabilitated person. I don't know, but yeah. That's the one example I have, but there are more.
But I think also the woman, a young woman who might have been abused or in a bad situation who wouldn't just move on, wouldn't
Yeah.
just say, "Okay," then that person could also be sent to the Ridge for rehabilitation.
Okay.
They obviously were not, so it was very gray. It's a very gray area.
Wow.
Yeah.
There were not it wasn't like, "Oh, if you do this, then you're definitely getting punished." There was none of that.
Oh, man.
I mean, unless you were a
That's,
woman, but not as a man.
yeah.
Well, but so often if you were a woman and you were in these situations, you were just talked about by everyone. I mean, everybody knew what you had done, that you had seduced this man.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was a lot of just shame. Lots of shaming going
Oh,
on.
yeah.
Yeah. And I think that would be generally true for Crusade Church too.
Mhm.
I mean, I had that experience. There were other people who did, where with the men, like with me as a young 15,
Right.
16, however old I was, like it's more about like getting me back and rehabilitated kind of thing
Yeah,
and
exactly.
for them it's more like they're the problem, not
Yes.
like we need to get them back into a state of grace. It seemed to me, looking back, for sure, like very different for the men and the women, especially the young men and the young women, like very
Right.
different.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
when we were listening to your story, there were so many times where I was like, I know the story. I know the story by
Yeah.
heart
Yeah.
already. Because I've lived it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. When did it transition from the city to the farm?
You want me to take that, Mel?
Well, you can just start it off. How about that?
So in the summer of 1993 is when we actually moved to the farm, and we chose a small farm in North Carolina. Like I said, some traveling ministry had really been trying to get our family to move. There are places like Florida and some other places they're trying to get us to move to. And I don't know exactly what went into making that decision for my parents other than
I know we had visited many
yeah, we
places.
we traveled around and visited different ones, and I know it was sort of thinking about for that move to one. So I don't know exactly why they chose the one they chose. It was very small. It was run predominantly only single women were there. But it wasn't far from where we lived. So I don't know if that played a part. I really don't know why they chose where they chose. But so we moved to this farm, and um, they we built a little extension. So there was a house for everyone, because everyone that lived there at that time were all these single women, and there was a single man, but it was just a lot of single people, even though they were older. And so everyone lived in one house. So we just built an extension onto this house. So there's this huge U-shaped house that everyone lived in the same house. So we ate together. Everyone used the same laundry. Like we didn't have our own place. We just all lived in the same house together. And the structure, my dad had to have an outside job because that farm couldn't make enough income to support itself. So my dad had an outside job and, of course, had to bring his money back to contribute. But we, as my mom and the rest of us, were expected to basically run this farm. So we had huge gardens, we had animals, we had, I guess almost like when we moved there, we kind of took this farm to the next level because now there was a
we did.
family. And like the fact that we had this large family that was living there, now we could become a sustainable farm. And it was up to us to make that happen, basically. So
It was a lot of free labor.
yeah, I mean, and it was very,
Imagine that.
the whole farm's experience in general was very labor intense. That was everyone, you got up and you worked. That was what you did. So, yeah, that's how we got there. That's kind of what it was. When we were there, we did school in the same house. But then you had jobs every afternoon. Every weekend was spent dawn till dusk. You're working outside. Yeah, that was the life there. And we only lived 20 minutes from town, but we never went to town. Like it was like we just didn't ever have any outside influence at all.
Yeah, at all.
And was the drive to move from city to farm just simply for your parents and for all of you to just be in that next level? Like kind of that was the progression, like, well, we're serious now. Let's go to the upper echelon.
Yes.
Yeah.
Very much.
Yeah.
And I was very on board. At this point, when we moved, I turned 14 the week that we moved to the farm. And I was a devout move person, I would say. I mean, I was like very, very serious. I was very bought in. And so I was very excited that we were finally going to get to this upper level where everyone would know we were serious. This was the real deal. And Liz did not have that feeling on it at all. But when we moved there, so we left my older brother to live back where we were moving from in South Carolina. So it was me at 14. Liz would have been
11.
I guess 11 then, yeah. Okay, so 11, and then it was like 8 and 6 were our younger two siblings. And we were moving from a life of very much just suburbia, just living, our little life and, playing games at home and, just being a kid. And we moved to this farm where we literally were just almost treated like slaves at times. I mean, it was like hard work. We never got a chance to say, "Hey, I'm not feeling good today." It was like, no, you would be told. Like one time we had this big garden. Well, we went all in the morning, out in the sun, in the heat. We're picking everything from the garden. We go back and we're shelling these beans or peas or something. And Liz and I decide to go up into our bedroom where there's air conditioning to go shell these peas. Now, we're not stopping from shelling peas. We're just going where it's cooler, where it's more comfortable. And it's still going to take us 2 hours to shell these peas after we've already worked for 2 hours in the garden and all that. And we got in trouble for doing that because we were in the air conditioning and we were not suffering in the way that we should. Suffering for God. So it was that kind of crazy control that just made no sense. Like I look back and I'm like, that makes no sense whatsoever.
Was the suffering for God kind of a common thread just for your whole time?
It
through this
was
group?
because it was, like I said earlier, it was all about death to self. So if you were not suffering, you were not in any way in the right or in the, in a place where God could use you. or work through you, you know.
If you like this episode, please go leave us a 5-star rating and review wherever that is. If it's Apple, Spotify, or another service, it's really helpful. And don't forget to subscribe so that you can get notified when we have new episodes and updates and things like that. Thanks, and we'll talk to you all again next week.